On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, New York City woke to clear skies and cool late summer air. Commuters streamed into Lower Manhattan, passing the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, which had dominated the skyline since the early 1970s. Inside the South Tower, to World Trade Center, 38-year-old Jim Cypriani settled into his office routine on one of the upper floors. Like tens of thousands of others, he had no reason to suspect the day would become one of the darkest in American history. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower, One World Trade Center, between floors 93 and 99. Television cameras soon captured live images of the burning skyscraper. Smoke poured into the brilliant blue sky. Many inside the South Tower, including Jim, at first thought the incident was an accident. Maybe a small plane gone off course. 17 minutes later, reality shifted. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, traveling over 500 miles per hour, struck the South Tower between floors 77 and 85. The impact ripped through offices, ignited jet fuel, and shook the entire building. Everything shook, Jim later told Guidepost magazine. Ceiling tiles came down, there was glass, smoke, alarms, people crying out. I remember thinking, I might not get out alive. Inside the tower, chaos erupted. Some elevators failed. Stairwells quickly filled with employees trying to escape. Public address announcements initially told people the South Tower was secure, but many ignored those messages and began descending anyway. A decision that likely saved lives when the building collapsed less than an hour later. A presence in the smoke. Jim joined a stream of evacuees heading for the stairs. Smoke and dust thickened as they moved downward. Cell phones were largely useless. Emergency radios often failed. Firefighters ascending with heavy gear passed frightened civilians moving down. It was during this tense descent that Jim says something unexpected happened. Through the haze, he perceived two glowing, faceless figures. They were tall, radiant, and utterly calm. Though the stairwell was loud with shouts and footsteps, he felt a deep, unexplainable peace. They weren't like people, he recalled in his Guidepost essay, Angels on the Stairs, 2002. They were brilliant and gentle. I couldn't see faces, but I felt safe. I knew I wasn't alone. One of the beings, Jim says, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Another seemed to lead the way, keeping him moving when confusion threatened to overtake him. Spiritual experiences in crisis. Jim's account is unusual, but not unheard of. In extreme danger, many people report sensing a presence, often described as a voice, a companion, or even a visual figure. Psychologists call this the third man factor, or crisis apparition phenomenon. Noted researcher John Geiger has chronicled similar stories from mountaineers, sailors, and disaster survivors who suddenly felt guided by an unseen helper. These episodes can be interpreted through faith, neuroscience, or both. Stress, oxygen deprivation, and trauma can affect the brain's temporal lobes and perception of time and space, sometimes producing vivid feelings of companionship. For believers like Jim, the explanation is clear. Angels, step by step toward life. The descent from the upper floors of the South Tower was long and treacherous. Each tower had 3 stairwells, but some were damaged or blocked. Survivors have described dark conditions, the smell of jet fuel, heat radiating from impacted floors, and choking smoke. Jim says that whenever his strength faltered, he felt lifted, as though unseen hands supported him. When the air thickened with smoke, he perceived it suddenly clearing just enough to breathe. Others in his group were coughing and stumbling, yet he felt a calm resolve to keep moving. By around 9:50 a.m., Jim and those with him reached the lobby level. Firefighters and police officers were still directing evacuees out of the building. Outside, Lower Manhattan was a nightmare of falling debris, injured civilians, and blaring sirens. They walked me all the way down, Jim later said. But when I got outside, they weren't there. Minutes later, at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed in a thunderous roar just 56 minutes after impact. Jim watched from the street, covered in ash and disbelief, realizing he had escaped only moments before disaster. Not alone in the mystery. Jim's story might sound extraordinary, but he is not the only 9/11 survivor who reported unusual helpers. In the days and years after the attacks, journalists and ministries such as the Christian Broadcasting Network collected dozens of accounts of people who felt mysteriously guided. Some survivors recalled firemen who appeared and vanished, or voices urging them to move faster just before stairwells gave way. Others reported strangers leading them to exits, only for those helpers to disappear in the chaos. Such narratives fascinated researchers. The American Psychological Association notes that intense trauma can trigger altered states of consciousness and vivid sensory impressions. But for many survivors, the experience felt more than psychological. "I know what I saw," Jim told CBN in a 2002 televised testimony. "They were angels sent to protect me." Angels in historical and cultural context. Belief in guardian angels runs deep in many faith traditions. In Christianity, angels are described in the Bible as messengers and protectors. Psalm 91:11 says, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." After 9/11, stories like Jim's resonated with millions seeking hope. Books and documentaries have chronicled similar claims. Guideposts and other inspirational publishers featured first-person accounts of supernatural rescue. While skeptics attribute them to brain response under extreme threat, such explanations do not diminish the profound comfort these experiences provide to those who lived them. Faith, survival, and science. There is another layer to these stories: resilience. Disaster psychologists say that meaning-making, interpreting survival as purposeful or guided, can help trauma survivors heal. Jim's conviction that angels protected him may have helped him process guilt and grief after witnessing so much death. Scientists such as Geiger and neurologist Oliver Sacks have written about the brain's remarkable ability to generate protective illusions under stress. Yet they also acknowledge that, regardless of cause, these events often save lives. By calming panic and sharpening focus when seconds count. A legacy of hope. Jim Cypriani has shared his experience in churches, interviews, and faith-based publications over the past 2 decades. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, but he knows what he felt. A peace and presence beyond himself. "God spared me that day," he says, "and he sent angels to lead me home." For him, telling the story is a way to honor those who didn't make it out, especially the hundreds of firefighters and police officers who died trying to save others. It's also a way to encourage people facing their own dark moments. In the larger cultural story of 9/11, tales like Jim's serve as a counterpoint to horror. Nearly 3,000 people died in the attacks. Thousands more were injured. First responders and survivors continue to battle health issues from toxic dust exposure. Yet even amid devastation, stories of help, divine or otherwise, remind us of the resilience and mystery of the human spirit. Final reflections. On that bright September morning, Jim Cypriani entered the South Tower expecting an ordinary workday. He left an hour later covered in ash, having witnessed unimaginable tragedy. And he says, angels in the fire and smoke. "They walked with me," he says simply, "and they got me out." Perhaps the ultimate takeaway is this: in our most desperate hours, help sometimes arrives in ways beyond explanation. For Jim, it came as radiant beings guiding him to safety. For others, it might be an inner voice, a stranger's kindness, or sudden courage. Whatever its source, that mysterious help, real to those who experience it, can mean the difference between despair and survival. And in remembering 9/11 amid the grief and loss, it is worth also remembering the stories of light breaking through the darkness. If this story inspired you, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more true survival stories that remind us of faith, resilience, and the power of hope.